Welcome back to the fourth lecture in our lecture series on Israel. This lecture today will look at what happens when the Israeli Defense Forces sought to confront once and for all the Palestinian Liberation Organization that we discussed third lecture. Today we will look at what happens when the IDF invades Lebanon. Once upon a time, the Palestinian Liberation Organization was headquartered in Jordan. However, in September of 1970, King Hussein, leader of Jordan, decided he had had enough of this state within a state and launched concerted military attacks on PLO installations within the country, forcing them to flee north into Lebanon. We have here on the left side of the screen is a map of Israel, West Bank, Syria, Jordan, and Lebanon. We also have very large numbers: 400,000, 400,000, 665,000, 1.7 million. Those numbers are rough estimates, circa 2003, by the United Nations, of the number of Palestinian refugees living in each of these areas. All told, 4 million Palestinians living in refugee camps. You have whole generations that have been born and have died in these camps. Some of these families have been on the move now for 61 years, since the 1948 War of Independence, and at the very least have been on the move since the 1967 Six-Day War. The PLO, once it left Jordan, decamped to southern Lebanon. It's outlined here in red. As you can see on the map at the right, Lebanon is at once a small country and an extremely mountainous country. It's divided to many, many different ethnic groups in Lebanon, but especially Muslim and Christian. We're going to come back to this ethnic map of the country later in the lecture. Suffice it to say, this will complicate things for Israel and Lebanon. The story of the 1982 war in many ways begins in 1970 when the PLO moves, but it also begins in 1978, 8 years after the PLO had decamped to Lebanon. The Israeli Defense Forces launched a minor offensive from the Golan Heights and from Galilee, the area of northern Israel, into southern Lebanon to attack PLO installations that had been firing rockets and artillery into northern Israel. A ceasefire was soon called via United Nations Resolution 425. United Nations Resolution 425 established a buffer zone and established a United Nations army, if you can call it that, to go into the area to keep the peace. Known as UNIFIL, or United Nations International Force in Lebanon, it was hoped that this would provide enough buffer zone that Katyusha rockets and artillery could not hit northern Israel, and also prevent further bloodshed at the hands of the Israeli Defense Forces. However, this ceasefire would not last. The United Nations forces were unable to prevent Palestinian rocket and artillery attacks, and so in 1982, 4 years later, the Israeli Defense Forces once again went into Lebanon, this time in much greater numbers and with a determination to destroy once and for all the Palestinian Liberation Organization. What we're going to watch now is a series of news reports from ABC News throughout the spring, summer, fall, and winter of 1982 and into 1983. They repeat primary source evidence. They're not necessarily objective, but they are fascinating. They allow us to see exactly what, well, none of you were born, so exactly what your parents were seeing back in 1982 So in short, watch this with a critical eye.
ABC News has learned that Israeli armed forces have completed preparations for a military attack into Lebanon, and U.S. officials believe will strike within a few days, probably this weekend. High administration officials have been alerted that Prime Minister Begin is on the brink of giving his forces a go-ahead, using as an explanation the assassination of an Israeli diplomat in Paris last Saturday. However, it's suspected at the highest level here that an Israeli decision to attack is time to take advantage of the U.S. preoccupation with the Falkland Islands crisis. At least 2 Israeli divisions have been spotted by U.S. satellite and other intelligence poised for an attack along the Lebanese border. Their position could foreshadow either the long-feared massive attack or a smaller invasion which would aim only at PLO installations in southern Lebanon. If the larger attack develops, some U.S. officials believe Israeli troops would seek to advance all the way to Beirut's outskirts while simultaneously attacking Syrian missiles positioned in the Bekaa Valley.
Good evening. The stillness of the ceasefire in southern Lebanon was shattered today by the sound of guns, bombs, and planes. Peter Jennings is at our foreign desk in London. Peter?
Frank, this afternoon the Israeli Air Force attacked a variety of targets in Lebanon. It wasn't the massive raid which much of the world has been expecting and which the United States has been trying to prevent. It was, however, an attack with major political implications. In the first of 2 reports, here is ABC Jacques Grenier in Beirut.
The Israeli jets flew over Lebanon for about 2 hours, concentrating their attacks on 4 Palestinian positions. The Palestinians responded with anti-aircraft guns and heat-seeking surface-to-air missiles. But the planes were too high for the guns and dropped decoy flares to attract the missiles. Lebanese radio said the Israeli bombs and rockets killed at least 25 people. Many more were wounded. Ambulances carried the casualties to Beirut, about 10 miles from the most intensive bombing. The rockets and bombs fell, apart on Palestinian military positions. Reporters were kept away. The raid put to rest the American-negotiated ceasefire between Israel and the Palestinians, which has held tenuously for the past 9 months. Palestinian spokesman tonight made that very clear.
Everybody around the world knows that this is a clear provocation and it's a violation and a breaching to the ceasefire which was agreed upon.
For several weeks now, Palestinian leaders have been predicting that Israel invade southern Lebanon. Any retaliation by the Palestinians for today's air raids could provoke that very invasion. Jacques Grenier, ABC News, Beirut.
It's been a long time now that people on both sides of the Israeli-Palestinian divide have been waiting for an incident, something that would generate open conflict again between Israel and the Palestinians in Lebanon. That incident, the Israelis blame it on the PLO. The PLO denied it, was a terrorist attack on Israel's ambassador in Britain last week. Within 24 hours, Israel and the Palestinians were attacking each other across the Israeli-Lebanese border. First, from Beirut, here's ABC's Chris Harper.
The Israeli attack was centered on Palestinian positions in Beirut, leaving over 30 people dead and scores injured. One key target was a sports arena, where Israel claimed the PLO was storing its weapons. Eyewitnesses say at least 10 waves of Israeli jets pounded refugee camps and the area near the main headquarters of the PLO. It was the third and most damaging raid in the past 6 weeks, while Israel said the hour-long raid was in retaliation for the shooting of its ambassador to Britain. The PLO denied that its people were involved in that attack. The PLO responded with anti-aircraft fire as the jets swooped down on Beirut and later sent Katyusha rockets pouring on Israeli settlements along the border. Ambulances screamed throughout Beirut, carrying dead and wounded to nearby hospitals. The PLO puts the casualties at 35 dead, but the toll is expected to rise as victims are found in the rubble. The PLO poured smoke bombs throughout the city to camouflage targets after the initial assault, and Palestinian gunmen seem prepared for another round, despite the 10-month-old truce here in Lebanon.